Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I have lots of fond memories of Fletcher Argue and Tyr and Isbister and all the rest, but I'm sure it's changed a fair bit.
I doubt Tyr and Fletcher Argue changed much.
Probably not.
I know that you've talked quite a bit in other interviews and whatnot about sort of the importance of place, right? But through the lens of like archaeology and the work that you do in archaeology. Where do you consider yourself in relation to sort of like Canadian literature? How did even your time in Winnipeg had influence on the perspective of like place and location influence the series?
Well, I mean, my original foray into writing was here at the University of Victoria. My primary sort of mentor was the Canadian author Jack Hodgins. He's very much a West Coast style writer. And he was talking about the difference between mountain writers and prairie writers. And it became very quickly clear that I was primarily a prairie writer. You know, there's two ways you can look at it. If you're on the prairie and you're looking out to those horizons, those great distances, you can either feel infinitesimally small, or you can feel like you're the tallest thing in the landscape. One can make the choice in terms of what you want to do with your characterizations in that very generalized, broad sense of you know, how does this person place themselves in their environments? And I've always sort of viewed the environment as very much an additional character to the story. And so it plays a huge role. And then from the archaeological point of view, part of my job was to kind of peel back time in those environments. Then you ask yourself, you know, as a surveyor, archaeological survey, you ask yourself, well, where would I live? Where would I camp? And you go out there and sure enough, you find that continuity of the human condition is the thing we rely upon. Yeah.
You mentioned, you know, your early years as a writer, and you know, now you've written many books and you're more mature. And I think every young writer has kind of a core reason for writing, something that drives them. Do you find that over the years that reason to write has shifted? Is it the same reason? Are you surprised by the way that your goals and motivations as a writer have changed over the decades of writing?
Yeah, it has changed. The 10-book series, I basically poured everything I had into that series. I think I wrote the 9, not including Gardens of the Moon, which took 8 years to find a publisher. But from Dead House Gates onwards, I was writing 1 novel a year pretty much. And I had a sense of urgency to what I was doing, to get that full story out. And I had scenes, I had exchanges of dialogue in my head all through those years. And these were ones that were going to show up towards the end of the 10th book. I was racing to get there. Finally did. It was like this immense burden had lifted from me. At the same time, I was also under contract to produce, I think, six more books. I kind of had to reset what are my motivations? What are the things that drive me to work on this stuff? It becomes more, well, okay, what can I do with language? What can I do with, how can I explore? How can I explore more than I did before? I began to play around with style a lot more. I do feel I'm being pulled in that direction, that I want to produce standalone works and just explore things.
Being an avid TTRPG player and DM myself, I'm very curious as to your process in adapting from D&D and GURPS towards the Malazan series, and how that influenced the writing style, and how, if you felt, whether it was more so you were trying to chisel away at the sculpture within that was the D&D or GURPS campaign that became the book, or whether you thought that this book was going to happen and that you just found a way to write it through the game system.
Well, first of all, yeah, it's a co-created world through two gamers, myself and Ian Eslamont. We were both archaeologists, and we met on a dig. And when we were setting up and creating the game world, the Malazan world, a lot of what we were kind of expressing was almost an active deconstruction of the genre. We were both independently were frustrated with a lot of epic fantasy at the time. So much of epic fantasy was drawing from a very Eurocentric, quasi-medieval, patriarchal kind of system, and we wanted to write, and we wanted to game against that. Actually, when we started altering AD&D and then GURPS, we really sort of concentrated on, well, okay, well, what would happen if magic is available to everyone? And you know, the first thing that occurred to us was your hierarchies of power can no longer be gender-based. So through the gaming, we kind of explored all of that and played that out. But most of the campaigning is actually the prelude to the Malazan series, at least the first series that Cam and I wrote. So it gave us our background. And so that would be my answer to you, is that it's a foundational thing. But originally, yeah, we were thinking film scripts. We weren't thinking novels at all. The novels almost became the default when we kind of realized that, at least in Canada, we weren't going to get anywhere with these kind of scripts. At least novelize the Malazan world, bearing in mind that we were going to take on a lot of the tropes and dismantle them.
Could you name a couple of the examples of sort of characters you gamed that did end up into Gardens of the Moons, or like parts of the campaign that ended up in Gardens of the Moons specifically?
See, most of the characters were gamed. Those elements that took place in Darujistan are a lot of them are gamed. For Gardens of the Moon, Anamander Rake was the first character I ever rolled up. You had the elements of the Crimson Guard that appeared. Those were blues and I don't think you saw fingers, but you saw blues for sure. These are all rolled up characters, the characters I played. They were all game characters. Crocus was not. Crocus was actually invented for the feature film script that we wrote. We thought we needed a young male lead who was going to take us through the story, and that's where Crocus came from.
We were talking in class about how the term magic system isn't one that we're really encouraged to use when talking about your world and how the magical order works.
Good.
And I was okay. And so I was wondering if like you had another term that you use, or if you just use magic and that's it, or something else like rules or.
Well, I mean, I think even we would have been using, if anybody asked us about the magic, at least in terms of communicating to somebody else, that we would call it a system. And there is, I mean, there's an inbuilt underlying structure to the whole thing, but we wanted to make it as fluid and organic as possible. And a lot of this goes back to this notion of hard versus soft magic systems, which I think is it's nonsense. It does not make sense to me. The notion of magic, as it appears in very early literature, it's an evocation of a sense of wonder regarding the unknowable. So if you then turn around and say, oh, no, it's all entirely knowable, and you create a structure for it, all you've done is basically created a new technology, in which case the literary purpose of magic is lost. We wanted something much more free-flowing and ultimately unknowable.
I was just wondering, I saw online that there was a gap between when you wrote Gardens of the Moon and then when it was eventually published. How did you stay hopeful, or how did you keep going when you wanted to give up, or especially thinking back in those early days when you weren't a successful published author yet and you're still in those early days? Like, how do you keep that flame alive and keep writing and keep going, even though publishing as an industry can feel so demoralizing, I suppose?
It's incredibly demoralizing. When I finished the draft of Gardens of the Moon, this is back in the day where you could not send anything electronically. You had to print it out. One copy and then a photocopy. Stuck them in the mail. I have no agent, nothing. I initially sent it to Del Rey, and it sat there, no acknowledgement that it had been received or anything, for a year. I think it was a year. And then I got a rejection letter in the mail. And so I ran off another copy because they don't send anything back. So then I sent it to Tor. And in that case, I think it was about 8 months when I got contacted, and they were really close to taking it. The editor, Patrick Nielsen Hayden, really liked it. He was waiting for one reader report. And whoever that reader report was, they hated it. So next thing you know, it showed up back in my mailbox. So basically I shelved it. And so my wife is English, and she wanted to move back. And so when we moved to the UK, I actually found the publisher for This River Awakens, because it was a Manitoba setting, and that was really exotic for them. So they were happy with that. And then my agent, of course, asked, well, what else have you got? So I said, well, okay, I've got this fantasy novel, but I'm going to have to clean it up because it's been 8 years. It's where the 9-book deal came in. It was actually a 9-year deal. But anyways, to answer you more directly, I almost gave up. even if you feel like you're almost giving up, as long as the manuscript is still sitting on the shelf, there's still a chance, right? So yeah, don't do the ritual burning of the manuscript. Not a good idea.
Are you aware of sort of how academia is starting to take up your novels, or do you just sort of leave us to do our thing? And
I'm not aware of smaller articles and stuff. I know that, I go to the International Conference on the Fantastic and the Arts in Orlando. So there I've sat in on presentations and panels by academics who are discussing the work.
it's more just a sense of whether you are okay with what people are doing with your work, or if there are times where you're just like, no, that's too broad. That's not.
No, I love it. In fact, yeah, I was just sort of wandering through YouTube, and when I saw the one your discussion on queer theory, and that was just, it blew me away. It was so cool. You follow up with the Marxist stuff, which was really intriguing for me, because I was trying to sort of connect what my experience was in anthropology to what you were doing, and it's really interesting to see that it does cross over quite seamlessly in some ways.
Thinking about motherhood throughout the series, I was so deeply moved by the character of the Maib. I'm curious specifically, within the former genre of epic fantasy, did you always see motherhood as fitting in with your series, or was that something that kind of came to you as you were writing? And what does motherhood kind of mean to you within the series?
I was dealing with somebody who was suffering from postpartum depression, and so one pays attention to the sentiments and the feelings that are being expressed. The thing with fantasy, it's the most capable genre for taking a metaphor and making it real. This is how the Maib sort of came into place. She is the metaphor of postpartum depression made real. It allows some distance between the reader's real world and what's happening in the story.
I wondered if there were any characters or demographics that you were kind of nervous to approach writing because you were afraid of misrepresenting or appropriating, and how did you go about researching how to create those characters?
There are experiences that sit outside your own personal experience, and there's a validity to them. The idea of, if you're going to create characters like that, ones that are sort of really on the edge of difficult aspects of the human condition, you need to give them the space. And that means, you slow your pace down, you don't tie everything into the plot, you give them their space. It's what they deserve.
Sort of gotten recently very obsessed with the epigraphs to all of the chapters in the books. It always makes me wonder, there are some, I've been creating spreadsheets, so there are some that show up in different places, like different parts of the same text. And it really made me wonder, are there her texts somewhere behind this? Or do you write those in fragments? Or how do you go about writing all of those epigraphs?
Epigraphs, well, first of all, structurally, I took that from Dune. I wanted the Malazan world to have a dynamic and active poetic tradition. I also wanted to draw on legal defenses. I wanted to draw on all kinds of things in terms of the epigraphs. But one of the functions of them, at least I remember this early on, they are unapologetically key descriptors of what's going to happen. To me, there's no subtlety. I laid it out, especially in the early epigraphs. I write the epigraph before anything else on that chapter. Since I'm tying everything into specific character points of view, if you've met that character, then it can evoke a sense of, well, okay, when did that character write this poem? But it also tells you that, well, maybe not. It may not tell you that they survived at all, because you don't know when the poem was written. It's not as reliable as the book presents itself as if it's entirely reliable, but it's not entirely reliable. So, and I kind of like that.
This class is also touching on fandoms, so I was just curious, because obviously this one was published in 1999 and things have changed, but also the internet did exist in the 90s. How did you witness that evolving? When did it really emerge and grow, and what was your relationship with that, if anything?
Yeah, fandom's interesting, isn't it? When the books were being published, there was one fan-based site online called malazanempire.com, I think it was. And it was just, a very early version of people gathering up and having discussions, I guess similar to Discord, I suppose. And what I noticed, because I kept track on it, there was a very consistent trend. Each new book usually got fairly lukewarm reception. And then about 6-8 months later, you know, their ratings for the same book and their thought of the same book would just start climbing. And it was very strange. And of course, I look back on it now, and some of these people who are still engaged in the conversation, you know, books they didn't like the first time they read it, and now it ranks as #1 for them. Then, of course, BookTube kind of happened, and that really changed things. And what's curious is, you know, this series is well, it's old. It's been around for a long time, but it continues to find new readers.
Okay, well, we can end it at that. Again, sorry, thank you again for taking the time. Yes, keep writing. We will keep reading for sure.
Great. We'll stay in touch, because I do visit Winnipeg. Who knows? Maybe there's a chance I can come into the class and at some
Yeah,
point.
that would be amazing. We would love to have you in some capacity actually here. So definitely will stay on my radar.
Alrighty. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.